A deal beyond the stars. The city of Erevan stood as a marvel of interstellar civilization, a place where neon-lit spires reached into the heavens and gravity-defying transit systems wove through the skyline like veins in a celestial body. Built upon the ruins of a long-forgotten alien empire, it was a crossroads of species, cultures, and destinies. Here, deals were made, secrets were traded, and lives were gambled in the shadow of towering megastructures. It was in the heart of this sprawling metropolis, amidst the chaos of merchants peddling off-world artifacts and smugglers slipping between alleyways, that Captain Elias Vance found himself walking into something beyond his understanding. He had survived planetary wars, navigated treacherous hyperspace anomalies, and even faced the dreaded Harzek raiders with nothing but a rusted blaster and his own wit. But nothing in his storied career had prepared him for the woman with glowing veins and fire-lit eyes standing before him. She wasn't human, at least not entirely. Her skin pulsed with an eerie bioluminescent glow, delicate yet exuding something ancient, something powerful. Her long rose-gold hair shimmered under the artificial lights, each strand infused with an almost metallic sheen, and when she turned her gaze to him, her irises burned like dying stars. On her shoulder, clinging to her as if she were her lifeline, was a small human child. The girl, barely 4 years old, had the same impossibly pink hair and deep, celestial eyes, but unlike her mother, her body did not glow. A hush fell over the street as the alien woman stepped forward. The merchants, thieves, and traders who had moments ago been shouting now retreated into the background, as if sensing something unnatural about her presence. Even the enforcers of Erevan, hardened by the worst the galaxy had to offer, gave her a wide berth. Elias had been through enough in his life to recognize when the universe had thrown something far beyond coincidence in his path. And this was something far bigger than a random encounter in a galactic marketplace. "You are Captain Vance," the woman said, her voice layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, harmonizing in some cosmic rhythm that sent a chill down his spine. She didn't ask, she knew. Elias remained cautious, his hand drifting instinctively toward his holstered weapon. "Who's asking?" His voice was steady, but he was already calculating exit routes, places to run if this turned hostile. The woman exhaled as if she had been holding back something heavy inside her. "I am Seraphis. And this," she gently touched the girl's hair, "is Nova, my daughter." Elias frowned. The way she said it, as if the child's very existence meant something important, sent alarm bells through his head. "That's nice and all, but what do you want with me?" Her glowing hand reached out, not aggressively, but deliberately. "You were a warrior once. You fought in the Orion collapse. You stood against the Zyre Dominion. And you survived the destruction of Lithar Prime." His breath hitched. Not many people knew about Lithar Prime, let alone that he had been there. Seraphis took another step forward, and he instinctively took one back. "You are a man who does not run from impossible battles, Captain Vance. That is why I am here." Her otherworldly eyes locked onto his. "I need you to take my child." Elias blinked. "Come again." Her expression didn't falter. "Take her. Protect her." Her voice trembled, just slightly. "And never let them find her." It should have been a joke, a mistake, some kind of scam. But there was something in her voice. Fear, not the kind that people had when they feared for their own lives, but the kind that came when you knew you were running out of time. Elias exhaled sharply. "Listen, lady. Seraphis, whatever. I'm not a damn babysitter. And I don't know what game you're playing, but..." A shimmering distortion rippled through the air behind her. Elias' hand snapped to his gun before he even understood what he was seeing. Something was coming. Seraphis turned, her glowing veins flashing brighter. The market lights flickered as if something had bent the very fabric of reality in that moment. A figure emerged from the shifting anomaly, a being draped in an obsidian cloak, its face a hollow void that seemed to consume the light around it. The people in the marketplace panicked. Screams erupted. Some ran. Others collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads as if unseen voices were whispering horrors into their minds. Elias had seen death before. He had seen battlefields filled with the wreckage of 1,000 ships and bodies floating in the vacuum of space. But this was something else entirely. Seraphis turned to him, her expression now urgent. "They've come. Please, take Nova and run." He didn't move. What the hell is going on? She clenched her teeth, as if holding something back. If they take her, everything ends. Everything. The black-cloaked entity raised a bony, elongated hand, and the space around them collapsed inward. The market stalls imploded, metal bending and twisting like paper caught in a singularity. Seraphis acted instantly. Her entire body ignited in a cascade of golden energy, and in that moment, Elias saw what she truly was, not just some strange alien woman, but something far more powerful, something that should not have existed in this dimension. She turned, extending a single glowing hand toward Nova, her eyes now pure, blinding light, a whisper barely audible over the chaos. "Remember who you are." Then, in a pulse of raw, unfiltered energy, she vanished. The impact sent Elias flying backward, crashing into a pile of overturned crates. When he scrambled back to his feet, gasping, his eyes darted through the crumbling market. Seraphis was gone. The black entity was gone. The screaming had stopped. All that remained was Nova. She stood in the middle of the ruined marketplace, her small frame trembling, staring at him. And in that instant, he knew. He had a choice. Run. Leave. Pretend this never happened. Or, "Well, kid," he muttered, rubbing his temple as if that would somehow make this all make sense. "Guess I just got myself into a whole lot of trouble." Nova blinked up at him. And then, for the first time since this insanity began, she smiled. The universe had just changed. And Elias Vance was about to find out why. Shadows in the void. The weight of the child in his arms was barely noticeable, yet Elias Vance felt as if he were carrying a star, something far heavier than its physical form implied. The marketplace behind them was still smoldering, the air thick with the scent of burning circuitry, shattered stone, and something far less tangible, a disturbance in reality itself. He had seen battles, destruction, and planetary glassing before, but never had he felt a place breaking like that. Nova clung to his shoulder, her tiny fingers tightening around the fabric of his jacket. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. But Elias could feel her trembling against him. "All right, kid. Time to go." He muttered the words mostly to himself, trying to ground his thoughts in action. "Keep moving. Don't think too hard about what just happened." The thing, the void-cloaked entity, was gone, but that didn't mean more wouldn't follow. He needed to disappear, fast. As he weaved through the now chaotic streets of Erven, he realized that the people had already forgotten. The damage remained, the broken stalls and collapsed structures, the flickering neon signs barely holding onto their glow, but the panic, the fear, it was fading. Shoppers and traders who had fled moments ago now wandered back, as if nothing had happened, confusion knitting their brows, but no recognition in their eyes. Elias slowed his steps, glancing around. It was as if their minds had been wiped clean. He turned to Nova. What the hell was that? The child looked up at him, her eyes still flickering with starlight. "They don't remember," she said softly. His jaw tightened. "Why?" She tilted her head slightly, considering her words before answering. "Because the space between here and there doesn't like to be noticed. It fixes things." Elias exhaled. "Yeah, well, it did a pretty bad job cleaning up the mess." Nova blinked up at him. "Mama didn't let it erase you." That made him stop. His grip on her adjusted, his mind racing. Whatever Seraphis had done before vanishing, it had saved him from being erased like the others. But that also meant whoever was behind this knew he was still here. And if they wanted Nova, he was now the only obstacle in their way. Elias picked up his pace, ducking into a side alley, weaving through tight corridors lined with pipes and flickering red emergency lights. He had spent years in places like this, places where people disappeared, where law didn't exist, where survival belonged to those who knew how to vanish. He was good at vanishing. But a kid, that changed everything. Nova stayed silent as he moved, her small body still nestled against his chest, her breathing steady. If she was afraid, she didn't show it. She simply watched, her gaze shifting between the shadows and the lights, as if she could see something he couldn't. Finally, they reached the docking bays. Arven's undercity was filled with hangars and hidden ports, places where you didn't ask questions about cargo, and no one asked where you were going. Elias knew exactly where to go. A rusted Valkyrie-class corvette sat in one of the bays, its hull patched with decades of repairs, its registration likely falsified more times than its pilot could count. The ship was old, but it had something Elias needed right now. A way out. "Captain Vance," a voice called out just as he reached the boarding ramp. Elias froze. His grip on Nova instinctively tightened, and he turned his head slowly. A man stood in the shadows, just beyond the edge of the docking lights. He was tall, his build lean but rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of someone who was either military or had spent far too much time pretending to be. But it was the uniform that sent warning signals through Elias' brain. Fleet Command. Not the standard enforcers of the core worlds. Not the planetary security forces. The military. And not just any officer. The kind that didn't appear unless something was extremely wrong. Elias slowly turned, shifting Nova to one arm, keeping the other hand near his weapon. "I don't know who you think you are, but I don't have time for whatever bureaucratic nonsense you are about to throw at me." The officer stepped forward, into the dim light. His uniform bore no name, no insignia of rank, only a single silver emblem of an eye. Elias' stomach twisted. The Raven's Eye. Special Operations Division. The kind of people who only showed up when the government didn't want something making the news. "You are harboring something you do not understand," the man said, his voice level, his expression unreadable. "You are already in violation of interstellar security mandates." Elias laughed. "Is that what we're calling it now? You mean the mandate that says if something scares you enough, you classify it as a threat?" The man's face didn't change. "Hand over the child, Captain." Nova tensed against him. Elias slowly exhaled. His heart rate had already increased, his fighter instincts kicking in. "I'd love to," he said casually. "But see, I made a promise." "Your promise does not matter," the officer replied. "Seraphis was never supposed to exist in your dimension, and neither was her offspring." Elias didn't let his expression waver. "So what? You want to take her back? Maybe study her, see what makes her tick." The officer's hands remained behind his back. "She is not yours to protect, Captain. You are a liability." Elias tightened his grip on Nova. "Last chance," the officer said, his tone unchanged. "Give me the child, and you walk away. No records, no consequences. You never met her. You never knew Seraphis." Nova's fingers dug into his jacket. "He's lying," she whispered. Elias didn't need her to tell him that. The choice was already made. He shifted his stance slightly, lowering his center of gravity, eyes scanning for weak points, exits, timing. He knew exactly how this was going to play out. The officer, sensing the shift in body language, sighed. "Very well," he murmured. The lights flickered. Elias barely had time to move before the air around him exploded. Shadows erupted from the space behind the officer, twisting, solidifying into figures wrapped in void-black armor, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Operatives. They had been waiting. Elias reacted instantly. With a sharp twist, he yanked his weapon free, firing before he even hit the ground. The first shot struck an operative square in the chest. No effect. Their armor wasn't just standard military tech. It was something else. Nova screamed as the air rippled around them, and Elias could feel something pressing against his skull, a pressure, a force trying to push its way into his mind. They weren't just here for her. They were here to erase them. He had one option left. Gritting his teeth, he threw himself toward the ship, Nova clinging to him as he barely managed to slap the emergency override on the ramp controls. The ship's engines roared to life. "Hold on, kid," he gasped, stumbling inside as alarms blared around him. "Because I have a feeling this is about to get a whole lot worse." The last thing he saw before the ramp sealed shut was the officer standing completely still, watching them. No fear, no concern, just waiting, as if he already knew how this would end. Into the maelstrom. The moment Elias slammed the emergency ramp controls, the Shadow Hawk rumbled to life, its engines roaring as the special operatives surged forward. The sleek black-armored figures moved with inhuman precision, their reflective visors showing nothing but the cold intent of their mission. The docking bay exploded in light as weapons fire erupted, searing plasma bolts streaking through the air, some slamming into the ship's outer hull, others sizzling past Elias as he sprinted toward the cockpit, Nova clutched tightly against his chest. The ship's AI flickered online with a disapproving chime. "Unauthorized launch detected. Confirm command override." "Override it, damn it," Elias shouted, slamming into the pilot's chair and one-handedly strapping Nova into the co-pilot's seat. His fingers flew across the controls, ignoring the red flashing proximity lock engaged warning that had already appeared on the HUD. Acknowledged. Prepare for combat egress. The Shadow Hawk's engines roared, thrusters blazing to full power as Elias slammed the throttle forward. The anti-gravity clamps fought back, resisting his takeoff. But the ship was old, and Elias knew how to break old things. With a hard twist of the auxiliary throttle, he manually rerouted the ship's power grid, sending a surge through the external couplings. The clamps shorted out in a shower of sparks. The Shadow Hawk ripped free. The sudden upward thrust smashed them both into their seats, Nova letting out a small yelp before gripping the armrests, eyes wide but calm. "They're still watching us," she whispered, her voice cutting through the alarms. Elias spared a glance at the external sensors. The Raven's Eye operatives weren't running. They weren't panicking. They simply stood there, watching, waiting, like they knew something he didn't. "Yeah, well, let's give them something to watch." With a forceful pull of the yoke, Elias sent the Shadow Hawk into a sharp roll, narrowly avoiding the first wave of incoming fire from the orbital defense towers. Anti-air turrets mounted along the docking station's exterior locked onto them, their targeting systems quickly adjusting for evasive maneuvers. Red warning lights flooded the cockpit. Multiple lock-ons detected. Missile barrage imminent. Elias gritted his teeth. "Shields up. Flare deployment on my mark." Missile launch detected. 20 inbound. 20? Elias slammed a hand on the manual override, switching to evasive flight. The ship jolted violently as he dove straight into a nosedive toward the lower docking lanes. "Nova, hold on." The first missile whistled past the cockpit before detonating against a civilian freighter below, sending shockwaves through the bay. Ships veered off course, alarms blaring across every active comm channel. "Alert! Unauthorized vessel engaging military response units. Sector lockdown in progress." "Yeah, no kidding," Elias snarled. "Deploy countermeasures." The Shadow Hawk spat out a burst of flares, the glowing countermeasures exploding midair into a dazzling array of electronic interference. The missiles wavered, then twisted mid-flight, correcting course. "Shit, these things are smart." Tactical assessment. 0 probability of standard escape trajectory. You think. The only way out was up, straight through the upper docking shields and into the chaos of Arven's orbital blockade. The comm unit crackled to life. Captain Elias Vance. His breath froze. It was him, the officer with the silver emblem. This is your final opportunity to stand down. There is nowhere to run." Elias slammed the comm switch. "Yeah, watch me." He hit full throttle. The Shadowhawk burned upward, breaking through the first atmospheric layer in seconds. Arven's skies turned from smoggy neon haze to the deep indigo of the stratosphere. But Elias knew better than to think they were free. Nova shifted in her seat, looking up. "They're already waiting for us." Elias followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. They had a blockade. An entire fleet of warships hovered above the city, their sleek, ominous hulls adorned with the Raven's Eye insignia. This wasn't a normal lockdown. This was an extermination order. Weapons lock detected. The HUD flickered red. Dozens of battle cruisers had locked onto their position. "Are you kidding me?" Elias slammed his fist into the console. An entire fleet just for one damn ship. Nova didn't look at him. She kept staring out the viewport. "They're not here for you," she whispered. Elias turned his head toward her. Her eyes weren't human anymore. They were burning, like stars, and something else was burning around them. The space around the Shadowhawk had begun to distort, like the air itself was folding. "Nova." Elias' voice was cautious now. "What's happening?" She slowly turned her gaze to him. And when she spoke, it wasn't just her voice. It was thousands. "They're afraid." The ship began to shake. Not from weapons fire. Not from pursuit. From something else. Something far older. Something waiting to awaken. The fleet opened fire. And in that moment, the entire universe folded inward. Darkness. Silence. Then, light. Not normal light. Not the kind Elias had ever seen. This was living light, weaving through the darkness like veins of some celestial giant, shifting, writhing, folding over itself. The ship was gone. No, it was still there. It just wasn't where it had been before. Elias' breath hitched. What the hell just happened? Nova floated in the air. Not sitting. Floating. Her small frame hovered above the co-pilot's seat, her hair moving as if caught in an invisible current. Her eyes burned with the same fire Elias had seen in Seraphis. "We're safe," she said softly. Elias clenched the arms of his chair. "Safe? Where the hell are we?" Nova tilted her head, glancing around. The space between. Elias exhaled sharply. The space between. He wasn't a scientist, but he had heard enough legends from smugglers and ex-warlords about places outside reality. Places where the laws of physics didn't hold. Pocket dimensions. Bridges between worlds. And somehow, Nova had brought them here. "Okay, kid," Elias said slowly, cautiously. "You want to tell me how you just folded space like a piece of paper?" Nova lowered herself back into her seat, her small hands resting on her lap. "I didn't," she said quietly. Elias blinked. Then who did? She finally looked at him. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't alone. They did. A ripple moved through the space around them. And then the voices began to whisper. Not just to Nova. To Elias. Ancient voices. Watching. Waiting. And as they whispered, the space around them began to shift again. Something was coming. And this time, they weren't running. The ones who wait in the void. The whispers pressed against Elias' skull, a weightless pressure that had no source, no direction, just an omnipresent presence. The ship no longer existed in any conventional sense. The Shadowhawk floated, but there was no space, no stars, no up or down, just the infinite expanse of the in-between. And the voices. They weren't human. They weren't alien. They were something else. Nova sat perfectly still, her feet dangling just above the floor, her wide, luminescent eyes reflecting unseen shapes moving in the darkness. Elias didn't know whether they were real or if his mind was simply failing to process what existed here. "Nova," he said carefully, forcing himself to breathe, to focus. "Where did you bring us?" The little girl tilted her head slightly, her glowing irises shifting with faint rings of rotating cosmic light. "This is the threshold," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The place between places. The old ones call it the Black Shore." Elias swallowed. It wasn't the name itself that terrified him. It was the way she said it. Not like a child reciting something she had heard, like she had always known. The ship's AI flickered. Error, error. Spatial location undefined. Unable to establish navigational coordinates. Elias barely noticed. He was staring at the viewport, at the things moving just beyond the veil. Massive, coiling forms. Shadows that weren't cast by any light. Shapes that had too many limbs, or not enough. They watched. They had been waiting. The whispers intensified. They were not words, not commands, not threats. They were questions. A probing curiosity, peeling back the layers of Elias' thoughts, his memories, his existence itself. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the voices stopped. The air grew still. Elias realized he had been holding his breath, his grip white-knuckled on the edge of the control panel. Then, "Do you remember me?" The voice was singular this time. A single entity, woven from all the others. It did not speak so much as it manifested inside his mind. Elias turned, heart pounding, his military training barely keeping his hands from shaking. And there, standing in the center of the cockpit, was Seraphis, or at least, something wearing her form. Her rose-gold hair moved like strands of liquid metal, shifting in impossible ways. Her eyes, once filled with fire, were now deep pools of lightless void. She stood just beyond reality, her edges blurred, her entire being struggling to exist within a human shape. Nova didn't flinch. She simply stared up at her mother, her voice calm. "You're not really her." Seraphis, the thing that wore her face, smiled. It was a slow, deliberate expression, one that didn't quite fit her features. "No, but I remember her." Elias' muscles coiled. He had faced planetary invasions, death squads, and monsters lurking in the outer fringes of the galaxy, but he had never been more terrified than in that moment. "What the hell are you?" he said quietly. Seraphis tilted her head, her form rippling. "I am the bridge. I am the veil. I am the breath between the last word of a dying star and the first cry of a newborn world." Her smile widened slightly. "But you may call me Nithra." Elias exhaled sharply, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. "Yeah. Well, Nithra, you mind telling me why the hell you're wearing that face?" Nova spoke before the entity could. "Because she's trying to make you trust her." Elias stiffened. He knew the kid was smart, but the absolute certainty in her voice sent a chill up his spine. The thing wearing Seraphis' face didn't deny it. "Trust is the only thing that holds the fabric of creation together," Nithra said softly. She turned her attention to Nova. "And you are the key to restoring what was broken." Nova's expression remained unreadable. "You mean the chain?" The whispers returned, this time softer, reverent. "Yes, the chain, the binding of all things." Elias clenched his jaw. He had heard the name before, in Kira's message. The chain of entities, the thing that had broken when he destroyed Moritan. "You're saying that's why my ship got blasted into, wherever the hell we are?" "Yes." Elias crossed his arms. "Then tell me something, Nithra. If this whole chain thing is broken, why are we still here? Why isn't the whole damn universe falling apart?" Nithra's gaze flickered, and for the first time, something shifted in her expression. Regret. Because something is holding it together, something that does not belong. A force that was never meant to take root in this reality. Her voice darkened. "And if it remains, it will consume everything." Elias frowned. "What do you mean? What force?" Nithra finally looked directly at him. "The ones who hunt you." Elias went still. "The Raven's Eye. The operatives. The ones who wait outside your world, watching from the edges of perception." She stepped closer, and for a brief moment, He swore he could see the universe itself shifting inside her body. They are not just hunting Nova. She exhaled slowly. They are hunting the last fragment of the chain. The cockpit was silent. Elias exchanged a glance with Nova. She wasn't surprised. She had already known. So Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper, "You're telling me that not only is she some kind of living piece of an ancient cosmic balance, but that the people trying to capture her are basically trying to steal the power of the universe itself." Nithra nodded once. "Yes, and they are getting closer." As if on cue, the ship's alarms blared. The Shadowhawk lurched violently as something from outside their reality locked onto them. Shit. Elias scrambled back into the pilot's chair, his hands flying over the controls. Warning. Unknown gravitational field detected. Hostile forces inbound. Elias turned to Nithra. "If you got any magic tricks left, now's the time to use them." She shook her head. "Not this time, Captain." Nova looked up at him, her small hands gripping the seat. "We have to fight." Elias blinked. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even uncertain. The starlight in her eyes burned brighter. She reached for the ship's controls. And for the first time, Elias realized. The Shadowhawk was no longer just a ship. It was something else now. Something alive. And Nova was about to show them what it could do. The universe shuddered. And then the battle began.